And good evening, church. Glad to see you here tonight, and glad you could be with us tonight on live stream as we continue our discussion week and talk about service tonight. Service as a spiritual discipline, service. And when we go into this and we continue our discussion about spiritual disciplines, especially service, as we focus on that in particular tonight, we want to make sure the way that we think of that is not some big event that we plan far out, although those are great to do from time to time with the church. But in the scope of being a spiritual discipline, it's the kind of person we are every single day. And when we talk about disciplining ourselves in the idea of service as a Christian, we need to build it up as a habit to where our normal life, who we are, the way we function out in the world, the way we function with one another, with complete strangers, it's just normal. It's just the way we live. Service. That should be our lives. You know, the world defines greatness in so many different ways. If you want to achieve greatness in the world, perhaps it's because you have a position of great authority. Perhaps you have numerous titles that come after your name. There's nothing wrong with that when you use it in the service of the Lord, but that's not true greatness. It could be that you amass great wealth, and there's many people in the world that view their success in life, their greatness, by the amount of wealth, the numbers that they pile up, and there's nothing wrong with having a great amount of wealth, especially when you use it in the service of the Lord. It could be that people find success and greatness in their fame. We live in a world where people want to grow up just to be famous. We live in a world where people just try to be famous and they work to get as many clicks and as many likes as possible. Inherently, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that, because if you have fame and influence, you can use that in the service of the Lord. There's a lot of ways that people want to view success, but the way that God views success should be most important to us. In fact, it's got to be critical. And so when we see all those definitions of greatness and success coming at us from a worldly perspective, we've got to let them pass on by us, and we shoot right through it and get right to what Jesus would want, right to what God would want. And that's really where we want to focus in our discussions tonight. What does Jesus expect for us on a day-to-day basis for greatness? Well, service. Service has got to come to mind. I was talking to Will earlier today. We were out playing disc golf. I had a terrible day of it. But nonetheless, you keep on playing. And he's like, what's the lesson on tonight? I said, service. You could give it. And he said, no, I don't think so. And I said, yeah, you could. Stop for a moment and think about service. Who are you going to talk about? He said, Jesus. I said, that's right. Now, pick a time where Jesus was serving. He kind of thought for a minute. I was like, pick literally any story. Literally any story. He went, oh yeah. And then there's the list that comes out of that. There's this moment in Matthew chapter 20 in which the mother of James and John comes to Jesus, and she's asking for a position of greatness for her sons. You're familiar with the story, and I don't need to go through the story itself. And they're thinking from a worldly point of view of success and greatness to be at this elevated position and to lord over people. I love what Jesus says in this. And when he had heard it, when the 10 heard it, they were very angry at the request. But Jesus called them to himself, and he said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. Let me change your thinking about that. I get where you're going. To want to do well is a good thing, but make sure you want to do well in a way that pleases God. And it's not like the way you see it in the world. It shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus said, if you're going to be great, you've got to serve. And it's not just one moment throughout the year and you're like, that's my day. That's my day, Lord. That's my day to serve. You are characterized. You are disciplined. You are created to be people who serve. And the full scope that we see in Jesus as the example is immense. We go back and we could think of one particular story. We could, any of them for sure. But when you put a bunch of them together, you begin to see the full scope of it. Think for a second about how Jesus served by healing people. Jesus served by healing people. healing people. Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. If you look in Matthew chapter 8, you can write these down. We're going to go over these. If you want a copy of this paper, I'll give it to you. I'll make you a copy because I need this for class. He heals a leper. He heals the centurion servant. He heals Peter's mother-in-law, and he heals many in the evening. Jesus healed and healed and healed. And it's not limited to just Matthew chapter 8. It was a thing that he did. And of course, he did it to lead people to God, to see the bigger picture. Jesus also taught. He served people by teaching. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, you can read the Sermon on the Mount. I would encourage you to do so, to see the teaching of Jesus and how he was serving the people to help them have spiritual understanding, to draw them closer to God. Matthew chapter 13, he taught in parables. Matthew chapter 15, he reveals these incredible teachings that are more plain and easy to handle, but he gives complex teaching. He gives easy teaching. He gives teaching to make sure that we are on the right track to please God. He serves by teaching. Jesus also does it by washing. John chapter 13, he humbles himself, gets down. This is the Creator, this is the Christ, and washes the filthy feet of his disciples. You know that story. Jesus also serves by sharing. I love this story, sharing. And I thought about this for a second. I was like, Jesus and sharing. And immediately went to Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Can you imagine what it's like for the Creator to share his time with people? I mean, in John chapter 10, he was in the house with them. And you know that story of Mary and Martha were working and who was given attention in the right place, but he was sharing time with them. And in John chapter 11, when Lazarus died, this has always been an interesting thing. And we know the big picture is he's helping people come to understand their relationship with God and the full immensity of what God could do. But if you really get down to it, he's sharing in life with these people. Jesus has an incredible power, and he didn't even have to go there. He did not have to go to that tomb to bring Lazarus back from the grave. There's other stories where he heals the nobleman's son, and he does that from afar. So we know his power isn't limited, but yet he chooses to do that. He's sharing in the mourning and the grief. And he's also sharing in the victory from seeing Lazarus rise up again. He's sharing in life with people. He's serving in that regard. Of course, he serves by feeding people, the 4,000 and the 5,000, and he's helping them to understand that God can provide for you. But he's really feeding them spiritually, because if God can provide even the physical, certainly he can provide on the spiritual level too, and that's the bread that's more important. He also served by comforting. Luke chapter 7, there was that sinful woman that came in amongst the Pharisees, and she was being looked down upon. She was viewed as a sinful woman, and why would he even talk to her? But when she does her acts of service to him, he takes that opportunity to elevate her and recognize what she's doing in contrast to what they're not doing in serving, and tells her she's free from her sins. Elevated, comforted that woman. Can you imagine what that must have been like? The shame she carried into that situation. But because Jesus is willing to use his power and influence and authority as a teacher, as God, he elevates and comforts that woman, even in the midst of a society who's willing to reject her. He says, I love you. I'll point that out. And ultimately, it comes to his sacrifice. His ultimate service was in his sacrifice. We could do nothing spiritually without Jesus. And Jesus, he did the hard thing. The hard thing. And those words still echo in our minds. You know them. Not my will, but thine be done. Not my will, but thine be done. Let me serve mankind, because they can't take care of the sins, but I can, he said. I'll elevate them. And he doesn't get gold in return. He doesn't get fame in return like he deserves. In fact, many reject him. And even today, many reject him. But he did what was right and what was true, and he served in what was good, and he served in what people truly needed. And this was his life all the way up until the end. Paul says, imitate Christ. Imitate me even as I also imitate Christ. Imitate me as I also imitate Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He also talks in this passage in Corinthians where he talks about his labor and his striving and his work for the church. And that always impressed me, because Paul was an apostle, and Paul had been one for very, very long, and you would think at some point he's just going to coast and do the easy stuff. But he uses language in Corinthians in which he talks about doing the hard stuff and the work that's involved there. Colossians chapter 1. And as he's moving in that, you're like, he's got the Holy Spirit and he's got people supporting him and he's still driving himself, disciplining himself, improving himself, never accepting that his service is good enough, that okay is acceptable, but pushing himself. I'm so glad the Holy Spirit put that in the Bible, because if I can see that Paul's doing that, then I got to do that. I got to want to do that. I got to want to get better and discipline myself to serve. And if that's the life that Jesus led in such a massive scope, then what we can see in that is there's a place for every single one of us to have a bigger scope in the way that we can service, whether it's comforting or whether it's teaching or healing or being there or sharing or giving. In whatever way we serve, let us serve heartily unto the Lord and with great privilege, understanding we do it with joy. That's what we got to do. Tonight we're going to go to our discussion groups and dive into this a little bit deeper, but I hope you do it with joy. There's a way that we could pursue this. It could just be the coasting, like, yeah, man, I do good stuff. I'm basically a good people. Or you could strive, and you could labor, and you could get on it. And when people see that, they know that these are Jesus's people because they see in you Jesus and the kind of desire and the push and the love for mankind that Jesus had. And that is when people start taking notice and saying, there's something unique and special. I want to be a part of that kind of service as well. It's contagious. You have the capability. You have the choice. And truly, we have the responsibility to do it with joy. If there's a way tonight that we can help you before we go to our discussion groups, there's a way that some sin is bearing down on you, or that you've been too far away from God and you feel like your service hasn't really been there and you're not really dedicating yourself, do something about it. Do something about it. This congregation needs you. We need each and every person, and we need each and every person to be as spiritually strong as possible. If there's something holding you back, let us work through it together. Go to God. Go to God and know He loves you and He can handle it, and the church will handle it with you. But if there's a way we can help you, come forward as we stand and as we sing.